Go ahead, David.
Yeah, I had thought that the thought, the idea that I've been wondering about, I guess, is kind of provoked by Nikki from last week when we were talking about the notion of incentives and how to, like, I think there's an argument that economics is the study of incentives, and Nikki pushed back on the term incentives, which I was like, what, huh? And then it's like I feel like I kind of got it, and it's very much in, kind of in my world from a public policy perspective as a technocrat. I try to design systems in my head that have appropriate incentives, which are ways to make other people do things, basically. And I think we're probably all doing that all the time, where we're trying to come up with a way to, get our kids to eat their cereal or whatever it is. But there's incentive structures implied with a whole bunch of the stuff that we do, and so examples like, whether or not the default on your driver's license is that you're going to be an organ donor or not, right? Is an incentive design. Is if you make the default, yes, I'll be an organ donor, you get a lot more organ donors than if you make the default, no, I won't, and somebody has to change it back to yes. And so, that's an incentive design problem. And it strikes me that in regenerative landscapes or landscape regeneration, if that's kind of the concept that we're dealing with, one is I've kind of this argument that by kind of prima facie, a regenerated landscape is more valuable, right? It's however you want to define value, I'm going to argue that a regenerative landscape is better, So there is, in some sense, in traditional economic sense, profit that's been created through the process of regeneration. And so one question is kind of who captures that profit, if you will, again, trying to use a traditional kind of a model here. And another is, how do you incent people to participate so that if A needs something from B, B provides it, right? So if the resort hotel at the bottom of the river needs water, the farmer at the top helps provide the water, or needs less pollution, right? Needs a clean beach. The farmers at the top of the watershed don't pollute the river so that the beach doesn't get polluted, right? There's a lot of reciprocity. And I think that what's fun about the landscape model is that if it's sufficiently interesting, if there's enough going on in the landscape, there's lots of crossing incentives. There's lots of crossing motivations. Things go back and forth, and you could always add more. This is where money and currency and payments and transactions come in. But, potential for coordination, because people are incented the right way, seems high. And maybe incentives is a bad word. And so that one of the questions is, what better words would we use? And I was wondering about, like, is it motivation or, maybe motivation is like, you can even take that maybe into non-living systems. It's like water is motivated to run downhill. It's not really an incentive, but that's what it tends to do. We have tendencies in behavior that we're trying to amplify, I guess, is the thing. And Dorn Cox he used the term complex reciprocity, which I really love. And I think, I'm still trying to play with what that means, but I think, the notion is that it isn't just, Tanuja does something for me and I pay her back. It's that Tanuja does something that's good and it helps Mark, and then Dennis gets to benefit from that. Because Dennis benefits, then he does something that I benefit from. And we've all had this kind of web of reciprocity where, you're paying it forward into some notion. But again, from the sense of systems design or systems intervening in systems, how do you do that? What's that mean? So I don't know if that's enough of a provocation, but that's kind of where I've been thinking is, what are these motivations? What are these incentives? What is our role in kind of creating them or managing them? And how does that work in landscape regeneration? Yeah, it was Dorn Cox Guild. It's in this book. I'll put the book in the chat too.
So David, to that, I'd like to add, there is a piece that is outside of incentives and motivation, and that piece is about my responsibility, my citizenship to where I live, essentially the commons. And we are all trained to ask the question, what will I get? And never to ask the question, what will I give? What does this offer an opportunity? in what ways does this offer me an opportunity to give? And because we've so conditioned our lives to the gets half of it, that the giving half is reflected in the tragedy of the commons. And now we're talking about, oh, the tragedy of the common needs to be privatized or financialized or whatever. But I think giving is one half of the equation of nature itself. And we need to incorporate that in our lives somehow.
Well, David, you sounded an awful lot like Adam Smith there. And Adam
I think
Smith,
I look a little like him too, which is kind of cool. So.
well, maybe. But
He might be reborn. Adam Smith is reborn as David Witzel.
The concept that if every businessman focuses only on his own personal gain, everyone else will benefit. So if Tanuja does something for her personal gain, and then Joe benefits from Tanuja baking bread on a regular basis, and then et cetera, that's a very standard model. And out of that is born what Tanuja is talking about, is that we are all literally taught in every way imaginable to see that what I'm getting is what counts here. And it's a very understandable conclusion to have been drawn from very understandable factors that were developing the concept in whatever year that was. I think it was 1776 he published Wealth of Nations. And so the bit that's missing there, which is in fact intact in many other cultures, is a sense of responsibility to the community. So I'm basically repeating what Tanuja said, and just adding some emphasis that it's understandable that we are where we are, but by following that line of logic in the Western civilization realm, we let go of this whole other part, which is, what is my responsibility to the whole, to the community? And so I think that's a pretty good example of where we are now, and then what to do next. So Gil, your thoughts?
Yeah. If I act from my sense of responsibility or from love, what do I get? I get a healthy family. I get a healthy community. I get a sense of my own value and self-worth, positive image of like I'm doing a good thing. Those are all kinds of incentives too. And I think we're in really tricky territory here. And David, you started it off really on point, which is that we have an allergic reaction. We on this call have an allergic reaction to the word incentive because it's bound up with this economic stuff, and because it sounds manipulative. And we don't like manipulative. Our ethic is that that's not a good thing. But David, like you say, it's kind of, there's intrinsic. I like Maturana's word of coupling. It's about coordination, choice of action, and so forth. So it's complicated, and I like this conversation because it's an invitation to step out of our kind of automatic knee jerk to incentives, economics, modern capitalism, bad, nature good, but nature's got coupling. The bee pollinates the flower because, I'm putting because in air quotes that you can't see here, because the bee gets nutrition from the act of doing that. If there wasn't nutritional value for the bee to pollinate the flower, would the bee pollinate the flower? Probably not. And last, I want to suggest that it's not just David who's sounding like Adam Smith here, it's Tanuja also. Because the problem with Adam Smith is that hardly anybody who quotes him has ever read The Wealth of Nations, actually read it. And pretty much nobody who's ever quoted Adam Smith has read his earlier work, The Theory of Moral Sentiments.
Yes, that is the book to read.
Which is much more in line with what Tanusha was saying, and that's Adam Smith also, who was a minister.
Yes,
Taught
yes,
about
yes,
moral
yes.
sentiments before he taught about economics. So
Right, that's exactly correct. And he believed, Gil, that the Christian faith was so strong and so steeped, and people were so deeply ingrained with that moral sentiment that they could follow his economic logic without fear of losing their morality. But in fact, within a generation or two, it was gone. And yeah, yep, that's right. That wasn't his original intention. Of course, Marx is another one who's entirely misunderstood. But here we are now.
Well, and I would argue, kind of back maybe a step or so from Pam, that you were talking about the people doing things in their self-interest, and we want them to do things that are kind of in the interest of other people. I would argue that one of the problems with our current framing is, if we're in a scarcity mindset and you do something for somebody else, that means you suffer, or you've had to sacrifice to do something for somebody else. And I would argue most of our climate framing, for example, is in this. Like, I'm sorry, you're going to have to suffer so that we can save the polar bears. Right? And so they're going to benefit, and that's a good thing, but you got to suffer.
Well, that's a zero-sum game, which is how it is all set up. Right.
So if there is, and so and I don't know how often we don't have a zero-sum game. I mean, I think we probably often do, but there are times when we don't. And the regeneration framework is, again, back one where there is kind of this notion of better. If we're regenerating the landscape successfully, the landscape gets better, and you in some sense get to benefit from that effort. So eventually, whatever you've done kind of comes back around. And so there's a faith almost in this greater good kind of that I feel like we've lost it in our current environmental pitch, but also I don't think we really know how to do it in our broader, sociological relationship.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Gil?
Yeah, two things. David, you're just like so spot on this morning. All of my consulting work with businesses has been focused on blowing up this assumption that you either make money or you do good. And this assumption that it's zero sum, it's one at the expense of the other. If you want to be responsible, beneficial, and so forth, you have to take a haircut on your returns. You think of all the socially responsible investment funds that say you're going to get a slightly lower return than market, but you're going to be doing an ethically good thing. And all of our work is saying bullshit to that. If you in fact, guide your business by the laws of nature and by moral sentiments and so forth, you can in fact be more successful in economic terms. That's on the one hand. And it's a deeply rooted assumption. Like, everybody knows that like a better thing costs more, but now at least in the industrial world that I grew up in the digital world of now, it ain't true, number one. Number two, in terms of sacrificing myself for the benefit of the others, someone once asked Ramana Maharshi, my master, how should we treat others? And he said, there are no others. So I'll leave you with that.
Tunisia.
So I want to continue with Gil's thought just now. Part of the same tradition, the question we say, that's the Indian tradition, we say is, the left hand does not have to thank the right hand for taking care of it, to helping it, because you're all one. So but that's kind of an ultimate thing. If I could bring this question of Adam Smith and his Christian morality basis assumption to a more, let's say, or living systems principle thinking, he was looking at the Christian morality lifestyle as the context within which he was proposing this economic thinking on top of which he was proposing it. So the issue with our reductionist mindset is that we ignore the context. And we do this all the time in all our design assumptions. In fact, it goes so far as most of our calculus, our math, is based on certain assumptions, which we never question. Yeah. So I'll give you an example. We routinely use the Gaussian curve, the normal curve, you know, the bell curve, and we apply it to data. So we do a basic analysis. Does the data look approximately bell curved? If it does, we apply it. And then we design for the middle 95% or 99%, whatever it may be. And then we say that the small percentage, the 1 to 5% that falls in the tails, will get ignored by whatever we design, but the number is small enough and distributed enough that we can handle them on a case-by-case basis. We're not being cruel. We're not being cruel. We're just saying that no design can handle 100% of the cases, but if we can design for the majority, then the minority can be handled on a case-by-case basis. This is the way we think about it. But I did a little simulation and I showed that the context, we assume the context to be what in mathematical terms is called uniform and random, neither of which is true for living systems. Neither uniform nor random. So what happens when you provide this, we use this methodology of Gaussian curve and elimination of the tails on a non-random, non-universal population. And what ends up happening is the populations that we ignore in the tails form entire communities. And that's what's so crazy here, is we routinely ignore the context, routinely. That even when we go out to extract, what is it we're saying? When we extract in an unlimited manner from the earth, we're saying that the context does not need to be considered.
Yeah, for sure. In every economic graph you see, the context is ignored. It holds ceteris paribus, holding all values equal, then you will have this outcome every time. Well, yes, if you hold, but none of that is ever true.
Right.
And so
And Pam, when we say hold everything constant, everything is connected to everything else. We're changing one thing and we're saying hold everything else constant. The only way you can do that is if you break or weaken the connections.
Aha. Oh, that's an interesting idea.
Isn't it?
And isn't that what modern is the hallmark of modern Western civilization, are very weak connections. And this again could go right back to the Adam Smith of how, don't worry about your connections, just focus on your own and everybody else will benefit. You don't need to think about your connections into the community. And we are not collectively encouraged to think about our connections into the community. And I don't think they're going to change their mind and start doing it anytime soon. I just, that's my current sense.
In one of the Middle Eastern cultures, I forget which one it is, Greek or somewhere, not Middle Eastern, sorry, Mediterranean. A normal practice when you sit down to a meal is to take something from the plate and put it outside the plate. And you say it's for the birds. But what they're actually saying is, this is my contribution to the context. Not that it's an actual contribution, yeah, because nobody eats it, but
They don't give it to the
reminder. They do, they may later on, but it's a minuscule amount. It doesn't actually hold up the bird population, right? But what it does is it's a reminder, it's a cognitive tool to connect you back to awareness of the context.
Yeah. Lynn, good morning. Nice to see you.
Good morning. I've been just having to do different things on the Tuesdays and traveling, so I'm so glad to see you folks again. Interesting conversation. I was thinking about incentives in this word, and it reminds me of, we've had dogs over the years, and most recently our dog, we went to some dog training, and we were told that the best thing is like having an incentive treats, right? So we really started, with, we would do things and the dog would come, we'd give them a treat, you give him a treat, and he's a very bad boy. We call him Bad Boy Billy today, so you can see where this is going. And that whole incentives thing became the way that he shaped his behavior. And the previous dogs were not, we hadn't trained them that way. We hadn't used that. We had really just kept that out of the equation. And it was really about the relationality and the connection between us and the dog. And we've thought a lot since about how that whole incentive structure set up the relationship in a different way with this dog. So it's just using this metaphor to say that I think this word incentives, it is true that it's been kind of polluted by capitalism and just, the way that we think about it, people need incentives. But I think it's like the cheap form of relationality. It's like it's packaged and then, you have this exchange, but in fact, it is an expression of a connection that could be more vital, could be more elemental, could be more relational. And I think we've kind of gone off the deep end on it. It's almost like we have to, just like with our dog, like when he's really bad, he's out there barking at something, we sometimes like shake and know he knows he can come in and get a treat. And this is the cheap way out. And that's kind of where we are today.
Well, another word for cheap might be efficient. It is the efficient way to have power over someone else's behaviors.
Yes, it works beautifully. But it
With
has that,
like
when you run out of treats, it has that limitation, right? So it's like the structure of reward, because that's what it is built on something that's outside, that's extrinsic, not intrinsic.
Yes, thank you, Lynn. That absolutely, and I think cheap is actually a good word. Nikki.
I just still have to point out you're still using it as a tool of manipulation and training somebody or something that they only get what they want. Like if they give you what you want, and that's where I'm averse to it. And Gil and I think have more in common because we're both burners. I don't know if anybody else here is, but we're both burners. And one of the guidelines is radical giving, which is based off of Larry Harvey's design of Burning Man, which partially he gained the wisdom from Lewis Hyde's book The Gift, Imagination and the Erotic Life of Art. And in that, there's a discussion of gifting economies from various cultures throughout history, that you give what you have when you can, and just trust that in that it'll come back to you. And that's a center for philosophies of, a lot of ancient cultures in different ways, whether you think of karma or you think of the more natural system cycles that were observed and still honored by so many different indigenous and Aboriginal groups. So I just wanted to put that out there, that I think part of it is that since 2012, that's what I've really tried to do in my life, which has not made me wealthy, but it definitely has made my life richer with people and experiences and radical generosity in return on and off playa. And I'll share one last thing. My cooking has got me in a lot of really epic places. So that's the gift that I always have to give whenever it's available. And that's what brought me into the Burning Man community. And that's what keeps bringing me back. I've never bought my own Burning Man ticket ever. So I'm just saying, it's always my food. So just leaving it at that, it can be something as simple as that. When you think of like solar punk futures and how communities can work, if everybody has universal basic services, then everybody's giving the thing they're passionate about, and think about how beautiful that world can be. And so maybe that's where the value proposition can come in, of how it could benefit us as opposed to manipulating us to behave in a way that we're wanted to.
Thank you, Nikki. Yes. Colleen.
I think some of it has to do with what we individually believe about humanity. Because what you believe about your fellows does affect what you do. If you consider them all friends, and then it's some kind of collaborative, life becomes a collaborative effort. If you consider all others as competitors or foes, then you have a whole different idea of how that works. Now, I've just been thinking about, what we've been doing for the last 8 or so years in our design of rainbird villages is trying to figure out how to eliminate perverse incentives. And so we've kind of developed this model of the ikigai, which I understand from people who actually know Japanese is not a correct way of characterizing that word, but it's the one that has been popularized and so many of us know about it. That when people can work to their strength, to their passion, their whatever, that there is sort of an inherent happiness in that. And that what I learned growing up in a family that very often went out and did good things for other people is that there was a lot of joy involved in serving. It feels good to be helpful to somebody else. And I think that part of what we've lost, a certain part of our cohesiveness, like maybe during the 60s or whatever, was this kind of a coffee house mentality of, yes, we all have work to do and we get through the work and then we go and we're with our people. And then we get to have these discussions and we sort of play off of each other. And it creates a certain creativity that we all by ourselves may not necessarily have discovered. And so I think that in some ways these Zoom calls have taken the place of the coffee house. And so I think that that's what brings a lot of us back week after week is that someone else may have a little tidbit that they're willing to share with us that is going to make a big difference in the way that we view the world. And it may be a missing piece that we've been looking for a very long time. Now, what I'm finding right now is anytime you take kind of an unpopular view of something, it just it puts you in those in those Gaussian curves. It puts you out on the ends, and so if people take an unpopular view, like right now, the popular view about the environment is CO2 and it's how it affects the climate and all that kind of stuff. And if you basically go against that, you get a lot of pushback from people who are building their lives on that concept. And so it's I had a long discussion the other day with somebody when I was explaining, I think water is a lot more important than CO2, and that just didn't go so well, because the person was really entrenched in it, and of course I'm entrenched in my thoughts about water. So, but I think that it really is interesting. It makes you think about, well, why do I think what I think, and why am I so committed to that? And perhaps, it's really a good thing for us to question our own motivations.
Yes,
Uh,
exactly. Absolutely. Yeah. Sorry.
And so that we can actually participate in meaningful discussions. If we have more curiosity than we have commitment, maybe that's a good thing.
Well,
Hmm.
and I would say that's why we've talked about baseline assumptions. And that is not leaving. That is now a core piece of every conversation here. Is what is the core baseline assumption that belief is rooted in? And if we're not able to really articulate that and feel that it still makes sense, then it's worth revisiting. And I really do believe that it is possible to be awake to the willingness to be awake and willing to reassess my assumptions when I become aware of them, and just make sure they still make sense. That is my only hope, is that I can stay alive to changing my mind as more information becomes available and I understand things better. And that's what I value in others. So one of the reasons I come here is because I feel that in this group is a willingness to evolve with the thinking as more of it becomes clear.
Yeah, I think it's, I mean, personally, I want to believe that our deepest incentives, or our deepest human needs and values are not in opposition to each other. That if you go deep enough, then you get some cohesion. And so it's just a matter of getting to that place. Now, I'm sure that any number of circumstances would make me believe otherwise, but I'm just I'm just hopeful that that's a possibility, that our most precious incentives are not actually in opposition to each other, that if you go deep enough, you find alignment.
I think you're right, David.
Yeah, I don't know, Colleen. And that's, I mean, I don't think it's true. I think that conflict is also kind of a natural human state. And you go deep enough, you'll just find a different layer of conflict. I mean, there is no perfect outcome. I kind of feel like the conflict changes and things like that, I think. But and that's, I guess, like, there's a reason, Nikki, in Nikki's case, like, that we're not all living on the playa. I mean, the playa consumes hugely more energy than it produces, right? I mean, so it's a net loss. I think we could take probably from pretty much any definition, but it's a demonstration that the alternatives are possible. And I guess I feel like I don't think we're going to have one answer. There isn't an answer. There's there's like a whole bunch more opportunities of things that we haven't explored. Is kind of the way to think of it. And that's why I've enjoyed this, because I do think that when we think about incentives, one of the problems is we're not thinking broadly enough. We're thinking about money, and there are so many other kind of motivations in
Right.
life. And that's what really we want to be able to kind of realize. And like, love is abundant, right? How do we have more love into these structures? I mean, I do feel like there's a whole bunch of kind of really satisfying things about being human that are abundant. And we only look at the scarce things, So if we can shift our attention to the abundant ones, we'd be better off. I don't know. But I do think it's increasing the possibilities that's really critical. I'm pretty convinced we're never going to get to a core answer that's the answer. We're always going to be fighting.
We're always going to be fighting? Is that what you said?
Yeah, I think it's human.
I actually, this is a fundamental difference of opinion for sure.
You have some image of a utopian
Well,
human.
here's what I know is that when you get to a survival level, when Santa Rosa was decimated by wildfires and that we lost thousands of homes, ranchers and hippies and everybody found common cause and we came together as a community. So I do not believe there's a natural conflict. I think that that if you go deep enough, and this may be a fundamental difference in hormones, honestly, talk about opening a can of worms, but I once heard a study that in talking to people who were transitioning sexes, and women, a genetically born woman was transitioning to a male, and what he shared was the shocking amount of violence and anger that he now felt that he had never experienced before his transition, and that it was a literal hormonal shift into a much more aggressive, angrier stance than that human being had experienced as a woman born and for the first 20 plus years of their life. And I've never forgotten that, because I have a feeling there's a bit to it. But for me, genetically female and hormonally pretty female, I can absolutely see that it is possible to collaborate and work together and find common cause. And
But Pam, my only point was all the time.
No, I'm not saying there aren't things that can happen, but we were talking about going deep enough to where we found a core, you said a core foundation. And I believe that, yeah, for me, all the time, there could be a core foundation of collaboration. I'm going to keep hoping that. Because I'm a girl and I believe that we can all get along.
Oh, let me pick up there, because I was triggered by this idea that there's always, conflict, and I think it's an and I'm very taken these days by that adaptive cycle, right? That everything is in kind of formation, and then it kind of crystallizes into something that is more complex, and then it has to release, and then there's like entrepreneurial energy again with the assets that are strewn about, and then there's organization and linkages. And my point being that I think we're always we're both forming and dissolving. We're like, and it has to, and then if we were to together ride that, talk about it, sort of think about what's dying here, what's growing here, what's living here, I think we would have the basis for a more resilient situation, because being on the surfboard together, right? But if we just think it was certain ways, your ideas, my ideas, of course, right? but the environment is going to be so tumultuous that the more that we kind of realize we're on a surfboard of change together, but main point being that we have both. It's going to always be both are in play. There's no final state of peace and harmony that would ever be, you know, static. It just will, it'll be there and then it will change. So yeah.
True, for sure. Especially since there are both male and female energies that are present in the world and necessary in the world. So for sure. I tried really carefully to not step on any landmines in my little Gil.
But you did, and that's okay.
Tell me
Well,
all about it, Gil.
So I'm with Nikki, and Nikki, I'm with Lynn. Lynn, you just spoke. I'm sorry, I got Nikki popping up in front of me here. And thank you for rescuing us from drifting into New Age. You know,
What?
from drifting into New Age, which is how what's his name? Penn the Magician pronounces New Age, pronounces it New Age.
Newage, sewage, newage.
Yeah. So look, what's the problem with conflict? Why does anybody think conflict is bad? And so this is, you know, maybe a little edgier version of what Lynn was saying. Like, conflict is part of life. It's part of the world.
Sure.
You know, stars form. You know, supernovas explode. The cabbage looper larva eats my cabbages. My cabbage develops
Is that
toxins.
conflict?
My cabbages develop toxins to what? Incentivize the cabbage looper not to eat them. You know, when I work out, muscles are torn and other muscles are built. The tide goes out and the tide comes in. And so why are we just like grasping on this conflict as bad thing? You know, when the lion gets hungry, the lioness runs down a gazelle and kills it and drags it back to the pride to feed its babies in an act of love.
Absolutely, so, that is not conflict.
The gazelle sure feels it as conflict.
Well, it's an interesting. Yeah, I think again we're back to the why of it.
Yeah.
And I think human violence is often without good cause. And so that's what I was referring to. I do understand how nature works, and I'm actually quite fine with it. It is the gratuitous, unnecessary power mongering that was animating my
but that's a different conversation. And before you spoke, there was a thread of conversation about conflict being bad. And I just want to challenge that.
Well, okay. I think it's a complex subject and definitely some conflict. Yes, I am really talking about the edges.
We're going to have a conflict over which conflict is okay.
Well, and I think that's a fair conversation, and I think it needs to actually be had.
Well, the different, I may have been the one that kind of started this conflict is bad idea. I don't know. No, what I was talking about is the systemic issues where you're setting up a conflict that otherwise wouldn't even exist because you have misaligned incentives. And so that's what I was talking about, is not the fact that, you know, I mean, we're going to have disagreements. That's just all about growth and development, is that whole, you know, disagreement type process. That's not what I was talking about. It's just when we set up laws according to these Gaussian curves or whatever, like in medicine and whatever, and we treat everyone like they're somehow in this 20% in the middle or something. you're totally ignoring the context and all of the other stuff that's out there, then that can set up a system where you're automatically pitting this person against this person. And so that's what we're trying to eliminate is how, like, for instance, here in the state of Utah, we have a bill that says it's okay if you sell raw milk to your neighbor. Okay. Now in Pennsylvania, they just arrested some Amish farmer for selling raw milk to his neighbors. And so what I'm just saying is they've got a built-in conflict that they've created there that we don't have in Utah. Although every once in a while we have somebody that reports, some sort of an illness or something, and everybody shuts everything down for a while until they figure out whether it's clean or not. But and I'm not opposed to that. I just don't think that it, once they've fixed the problem, they should let it go forth. But see, the thing that I'm concerned about is, if we automatically see our fellow men as the enemy or someone that requires competition rather than collaboration, what does that do to our mentality? How do we feel about our neighbor? What are we more inclined to do as a result of that kind of thinking? That's my only issue.
Thank you, Colleen.
I mean, we have disagreements all the time in my family. In fact, as we were raising our kids, the thing that I said over and over again is make your case. In other words, think it through enough that you can talk it through to someone else,
Right, and find the holes in your own theory and then adapt. And that's what's important, that we keep being willing to change our mind when we have new case evidence. So absolutely. Nikki, thank you for waiting.
Yeah, no problem. I just wanted to point out, like, and it may seem contradictory to what I was saying on my last comment, even though I really don't mean it to be, which is that when it comes to conflict, one of the things that has been really hard for me to come to terms with after really like intense Christian, like, well, I was raised in a Jehovah's Witness family that taught that, there eventually would be a time where a savior would come and there would be a paradise earth and everybody would live in peace and abundance and all of that, right? So undoing that part of my mind that thinks that utopia could ever be possible was only possible not through therapy and all sorts of, religious like cult deconstruction and so forth. It was studying nature and finding out how much conflict there is in nature between ants, between chimpanzees, between, like like what happens in herds of lions and things of that nature. Like, conflict is something that I think has evolved, or shall I say enlightened bonobos, that we can achieve forms of fun conflict that will then bring a distaste in our mouths for the more violent and aggressive conflict we're seeing in the active wars that are happening right now, genocides and everything. And that could take that away, but then we still have to find a healthy outlet for the instinctual nature of competition and aggression we have as humans. That was a survival mechanism that we don't need anymore. And I'll just
American
leave it at
football. American football is a great release, they say, for the genuine need for aggression and competition. So but I hear you, and we are we've drawn to the end. Thank you so much, Dave. Every time you succeed.
And note, Dave has this wonderful ROI going on, where he speaks literally 5 sentences, and it gets us going for 60 minutes.
I know, it's perfect.
And then I learned from it too. See, I'm benefiting from all of it. So
Yeah.
perfect.
Yeah. And please know, I am not suggesting that everybody needs to turn into a woman. I don't believe in estrogen for all, but I do look forward to when feminine energy plays a larger and larger part in decision making. And,
Yes.
and
Careful what you wish for, Pam.
well, let's test it out and see. How about that? And if we're wrong, we can go back to blowing each other up.
Well, there's a better masculine to be had as well, right?
Oh, well.
But that's it, no, that's it, right? The feminine energy in men as well.
And the
So-
masculine energy in women.
Absolutely.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, yep.
Are
All
you
right.
raising your hand, Gil, or saying goodbye?
Oh,
Yeah, you're muted.
You're muted.
Looks like he's praying.
Yeah.
you're still muted. Okay, there you are.
Yeah, I just want to register my objection to this New Age version of masculine and feminine.
Okay.
That's all.
Okay. Fine.
But we're in a safe space here, so the conflict can be managed. So
Yeah.
Also, it's New Age only for this half of the world, this hemisphere, right? It's not New Age for the other half.
This categorization of moods and qualities into masculine and feminine, and
I see.
its
I see.
and its recent history correlation with brain asymmetry and so forth is I'm pushing back on that. Let me just be nice and say that.
Yeah.
It's a simplistic reductionist idea that has captured the culture. It's not supported in reality. Male and female creatures exhibit a wide range of qualities, not just in humans, but in other critters. The range is wider in humans, obviously, than others, because we're way more complex than others. But I really urge us not to fall into simplistic dichotomies about these very complex things.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you. That is such a perfect thing. May we not fall into simplistic, reductionistic thinking any longer. And that is what we're all about here, is complex systems and complex thinking.
And yet we do it because we do. Because we're humans, we're in the culture we're in, and we're caught in things that we're not even aware of that we're caught in.
Of course. So we have to keep searching and being willing to reassess.
but not all humans do, Gil. Only the 80% under that middle part of the bell curve.
So,
On the edge.
so
Teasing,
David,
just teasing.
could I request that you run the next session about the 80 and 20 and generalization? Because no, generalization is required in order to function. But where we miss is how to apply it.
Yeah, I don't think I'm the man to go to for this one. So I think you guys are gonna have to pick on somebody else for next week. But I do think that this diversity issue, we're really unable to handle how big the world is. And that's one. So we keep trying to simplify it, but then the simplifying breaks things.
Well, yes, and that's a little bit of the concern about the whole bioregional shrinking down, tribalism that can unfold out of that, and that to me is a real concern on the other side of it. Fan, you've quietly been smiling at us all morning. Do you have anything you'd like to add?
I just feel, oh yeah, it's hard to verbalize. I really enjoy this space. I was really somehow really connecting to this life impulse, beyond the conflict is, how to really reduce unnecessary human suffering. That's the center of it. And if we are aligned towards that, where conflict can be transformed into a more holistic, way to look at the world, understand each other's, social dynamics. So whenever this conflict, that kind of feeling arise, can we just rephrase it in a more positive way that can really unite us, can really somehow, bring forth, positive human qualities. And that's a, common grounds I want to seek for every conversation I have or every encounter I have. But thank you again for this new origin space.
Thank you. Thank
Thanks,
you.
Thank you for being here.
Yeah.
I'm gonna
No, and
switch
you
off
make me
recording
wonder
now.
whether there's a difference between conflict in a zero-sum world and conflict in a positive-sum world, right? Because
Yeah.
you have more degrees for negotiation kind of in a positive-sum world. So.
Right. Right. Yes, indeed. All right, you guys.
Thanks, it was fun.
Regular day must begin. I think that see some of you guys a little bit later in the week.